Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you with another video. And today, we now enter into our next season of What If Bel Cranel Was Thor? Danmachi, The Last King, Season 2, Part 1. First and foremost, if you're a fan of the channel and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Also, if you haven't, check out Season 1 of this series so you can be caught up on everything as we now enter into our next portion of the story. As we get into Season 2, Bel and his friends now face new dangers along the way. The conniving god Apollo and his familia has now set his sights upon claiming Bel for himself. However, Bel has a few surprises along the way. And in due time, what will happen when Bel and his friends make a shocking discovery in the red light district of all places? For all this and more, stay tuned as we now continue. What If Bel Cranel Was Thor? Danmachi, The Last King, Season 2, Part 1. As always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Bel sat in a tavern, along with his friends Welf and Lily. They had just finished their day's adventure in the dungeon, having finally been able to move up to the mid-level. The group had improved in the time that they had spent together. They had grown stronger, and they had improved in many ways. For Bel, he was actually celebrating that he was progressing well in his power. The power of Thor, his strength. With every adventure, with every battle fought, slowly his level was starting to rise, to the point where he might reach a level 3 in such a short amount of time. Even Welf was growing in rank, actually having reached a rank 2. Of course, while the group was happy for their success, Lily would also point out that this might mean the end of them pretty soon enough. All three of them understood that they weren't a part of the same familia. Lily was still held to the familia that her family came from, and Welf was still a part of the Hephaestus familia. And now that he had moved up in rank 2, what he forged would be worth much more than it was before. Of course, Welf promised that he didn't plan on leaving the group, and in fact he was happy staying and partying with them. While they were enjoying themselves though, the festivities would be interrupted sadly, as a member of the Apollo familia, that being a young brat named Pollum, would approach. He and his group, overhearing them talk and celebrate, they began to disparage them, speaking ill of this ragtag team of adventurers. Especially Bel. Bel Cranel had become a bit of a big celebrity, so to speak. The hero Gale Thunder of the Hestia familia. The boy who had inherited the power of Thor, as it were. While there were many who were intrigued by this, as the name of the god of thunder had not been spoken in almost 500 years, there were also others who were skeptical of him. How much was it that Bel was actually doing anything, or more so, that it was just the power of Thor that he had inherited? There were many that thought that Bel was simply getting a free ride to the top of being one of the greatest heroes. That without that hammer and without that little power of his, he would be a nobody, a nothing. And now, in just a few short months, he had already moved up to almost a level 3. Belle tried to ignore him. So did Welf, as well as Lily. But the young member of the Apollo Familia just continued to speak out of turn. It continued to get worse, especially when he spoke ill of Hestia. Belle could tolerate many things. He had no problems if people spoke bad on his name. He was used to it. It was something that he truly did not care about, but when they spoke bad of his goddess, then and only then did his rage begin to flare. Of course, before he could do anything, Wolf would end up throwing a mug in the boy's face. Other members of the Apollo Familia would attempt to fight them. However, Belle and Wolf would be able to take care of them pretty easily. That was until another member of the Apollo Familia appeared. He was tall, with red hair. As he looked at Belle with Mjolnir by his side, before Belle could even move, the man threw a knife, causing Mjolnir to slip from Belle's side and fall to the ground. Before he knew what happened, Belle had been kicked in the face and hit with a series of strikes faster than he could have anticipated, knocking him to the ground. Wolf attempted to go to his side, but before he could, he too was taken out by the attacker. Once again, he turned his attention back to Belle. Belle instantly thought to summon Mjolnir, but before it could even reach his fingers, his hand was already smacked to the ground, as he was picked up and beaten once again. The smug member of the Apollo Familia, he explained that he had been watching Belle for a bit, just to see how he worked and how he fought. And he had seen everything he needed to know. Mjolnir was a strong and powerful weapon, no doubt about that. The mighty hammer that no one could pick up except for the one whom was worthy, that remained true. But still, if Belle couldn't grab the hammer, then it meant he was at a disadvantage. He just had to move faster than Belle could summon Mjolnir, keeping Belle on the defensive at all times. He was preparing to get revenge for his counterparts. That was until Bet, a member of the Loki Familia, would step up and tell them to leave, before Belle could be finished off. Belle would gather himself as the others made their way back to the home of Belle and Hestia, tending to his wounds. While Hestia was thankful that Belle stood up for her, she advised him not to get into small fights. However, she was a bit alarmed when she learned that it was a member of the Apollo Familia that had done so. The following evening, they would receive a letter inviting them to a banquet of the gods. But not just that they were allowed to bring one member of their familia with them. Hestia would accept the invite, as she would be taking Belle with her, while the gods were all getting adorned for the night. At the banquet hall, Belle would be surprised to meet many of the gods that were there, among them being Micah, as well as Naza. Micah being the god of the Takamichi-zuki Familia. Among them, there was also Hermes, who had met with Belle once again, the two of them not having spoken to one another since their adventures in the 18th floor of the dungeon. While the festivities were going on, and many were getting acquainted at the banquet, Hermes would speak with Belle, learning more about him, about his past, what made the boy want to be a hero, and how he felt to have the power of Thor. Of course, Hermes would tell stories about himself and Thor, the two of them often getting in trouble with one another back in their days up in the heavens. But of course, things had changed. After the war 500 years ago, he hadn't seen his friend, so it brought him comfort to see the power of Thor back in the world, back in the hands of a true hero. Of course, things got more lively when the goddess Freya appeared, accompanied by Otar, a member of her familia. The goddess of beauty certainly caught the eyes of many of whom they laid upon her. Hestia not being too impressed, as she wanted to make sure that Belle didn't get a good look at her. After all, one look from her, and anyone could be smitten. And then things only seemed to go from bad to worse when Loki appeared. She, along with her member of her familia, Miss Eyes. Of course, Belle and Eyes got along fine, although Loki and Hestia, not so much. Although Loki didn't look down at Belle. She couldn't. He had the power that her brother once used. If he was really worthy to use it, then it meant he had to be good for something at least. Although she didn't like how he was getting too close to Eyes. She didn't like that at all. All the same, the party went on fine for the most part. That was until Apollo arrived. At first, everything seemed all well and good. It seemed as though there was nothing to worry about. However, things quickly became apparent when Apollo, who was the host of the party, would confront Belle immediately, Hestia moving to shield him. But Apollo had now sprung his trap, for he wanted retribution. Retribution for the damage caused by Belle, a member of the Hestia Familia, pointing to his other members of his Familia, who had been beaten up in the bar brawl, and holding it against Belle profusely. It soon became even more apparent of what he was really after. As compensation, he wanted Belle for himself. The god having a leer for young Belle, desiring him for himself. And as such, he challenged Hestia and her Familia, albeit only Belle, to that of a war game. However, Hestia would instantly refuse, and they would leave the banquet. The next day, as Belle was preparing to make his way to the dungeon, Hestia would warn Belle to be careful, and he promised he would be safe. However, as the two of them were about to leave, they would find themselves under attack. The entire area surrounded by the Apollo Familia. In the distance, people within the city could hear the fighting that was beginning to start. A war between familias, as it were. Belle would carry Hestia, Mjolnir by his side, as he moved and evaded many of the attacks that were coming their way. Belle was now starting to become angered. It was one thing for them to come after him, but now they were coming after his goddess, something that he did not tolerate. As Belle and Hestia continued to make their way, Belle knew that if he could get to the guild where no fighting was allowed, then they would be safe. They had only gotten halfway though, when Belle had made it to one of the rooftops, finding himself completely surrounded by members of the Apollo Familia, which had a decent size about them. Among them, one of the members, Cassandra, would warn Belle that it would be wise for him to simply submit. After all, when Apollo wanted something, he was going to get it. However, Belle didn't have any time for it. He made it clear he was not going to leave. He was not going to leave Hestia or his familia. Dark storm clouds started to surround them. The Apollo familia would continue on the offensive. In the process, Hestia had actually been struck in the arm. It wasn't too bad, but still it caused her to bleed, and she was in a little pain. The moment he saw this, Bel looked back at them with anger. The storm clouds becoming darker as they started to surround Bel entirely. What have you done? You hurt my goddess. Now, you will pay. Bel summoned Mjolnir to his hand. Thunder and lightning starting to crash around them all as a strike of lightning hit Mjolnir all at once. In a great flash, Bel would use Lightning Bolt, causing everyone to disperse all at once. The Apollo familia started to become a bit afraid at what had happened. They didn't like the idea of going up against Bel in this current state. To make matters worse, a few of Bel's friends, Welf and Lily, had attempted to come to their rescue. However, another problem occurred. Members of the Soma familia, the familia that Lily was a part of, would appear and kidnap her, taking her back to her familia where she belonged. Welf would have no choice but to go after her. Hestia saw what Bel had become. Even only being at a level 2, and only being able to draw on a portion of the power of Thor, it was still much above what they could have possibly expected. The pursuers would attempt to go after Bel once again. However, he would brush and push them aside, not allowing for them to get any closer. Bel would make short work of them all, as he continued to fight and attack from every which direction. From out of nowhere, another member of the Apollo familia, Hyacinthos, moving at quick speeds, would slash at Bel from the back, causing him to yell in pain. Hestia becoming worried for Bel and his injury, as Bel turned to face him. You want to fight with me? Not really. I don't know what Master Apollo sees in you, but still, for my master, I do as he requires, even if that means making you a part of our familia. Bel would throw Mjolnir at him. However, Hyacinthos would use his speed in order to evade the hammer, before attacking Bel once again. Bel attempted to use the lightning bolt and summon Mjolnir back to his side. This time remembering from his last fight, he would attempt to move out of the way of Hyacinthos, to grab his hammer and to go back on the offensive. However, before Mjolnir could even get to him, Hyacinthos would grab him and move him out of the way. Bel, not being in sync, wasn't able to grab hold of his weapon. That's a nice try. I must commend you. But still, like I've stated before, that hammer of yours is nothing but a bowling club, a blunt instrument that anyone could use if given the opportunity. In the end, without it, you are absolutely nothing. Bel would use his small sword, created from the horn of the Minotaur, gifted him by Welf. While the blade was powerful, and Bel could channel his lightning magic through it, in the end, Hyacinthos was simply too fast for Bel to connect with, Bel continuing to take damage over and over again, despite the amplification in power that he had received. In all of this, there wasn't much more that he could do. Bel knew that he could withstand damage to a certain extent, but for how long he wasn't sure. Hestia would warn Bel to leave, to not keep fighting, but at this point Bel refused. He kept trying to summon Mjolnir to his side, but Hyacinthos was always quicker, making sure that Bel and the hammer missed each other, sometimes by just a few inches, before Bel could even grab the handle. And once again, he would find himself on the ground. Hyacinthos held a blade to Bel's neck. "You make me sick. You know that? Really, what do any of these people see in you? You are not a true hero. Sure, with all the flash and circumstance, you can take out the low levels. But when it comes to the true heroes, you are nothing. You bring shame to the name of Thor. But all the same, you will be brought to my god." Although he didn't say anything about me not being able to take off an arm or a leg. Before Hyacinthos could strike Bel, a sniper would attack him, causing him to move back and retreat, giving them just enough time to escape and make their way to safety, as other members and friends that they had made along the way had come to help them, getting Bel and treating him of his injuries, as the Apollo Familia would make their retreat. In the midst of their escape, Hestia would wonder of what she should do. She would ask Bel, and Bel would encourage her, stating that he would follow whatever decision she wanted. As such, they would make their way to the Apollo Familia's base. Once arriving, they would agree to the war games. Once again, there would be a meeting of the gods. In such, they were going to decide in what sort of contest they would compete in. Of course, among them, Apollo's Familia outranked Hestia's, primarily because she only technically had one member, and that was Bel. Of course, Hestia suggested that they do a one-on-one competition, but Apollo felt as though that would be unfair, stating that it would be unwise of him to accommodate her when he had everything to lose. She only had one member to fight, and that member, albeit one, had the power of Thor on his side. Who's to say that his best warrior wouldn't be able to win? Of course, Hyacinthos would probably take exception to this. But all the same, they would decide that they would draw from a box, and for whatever event would come out of it, that was where they would battle. Hermes would be the one to decide, and once he did so, it was revealed that their war game would be that of a castle raid. Of course, this still didn't favor Hestia at all, as she still only had Bel to fight on her behalf. All the same though, Apollo would be on the defensive. He would be the one in the castle, and Hestia, with whatever team she had, would have to be the ones that attempted the raid and to capture the flag. Hestia suggested asking for outside help, but Apollo immediately was against this, not liking the idea of Hestia's Familia needing to gain even more help than they were already owed, noting that her lack of members of her Familia was of her own volition, and as such she should have to suffer the consequences. However, upon hearing this, Freya would speak up, asking if the god Apollo was afraid, noting that even with Bel having the power of Thor, he's still fairly confident that he could win such an event. He asked if he really was taking this seriously. Among the members of the Familias, and among the gods, even Loki was a bit pissed off at this. pissed off simply for the fact that Apollo was so arrogant to believe that the power of his familia alone could outwit the power of the god of thunder. Of course, she wouldn't say this aloud, but she wanted Belle to win also. And such, she was quickly able to speak up, noting that Apollo was already showing great disrespect. The disrespect to believe that his familia was more than strong enough to fight Belle alone, even with the power he had now. But the idea of him gaining outside help, that was what shook his confidence. Apollo, not wanting to lose or save face, would agree to the terms, and it would be put in writing that for the losing side, that goddess would have to accommodate the other in whatever way they demanded, and there would be no exceptions. They all knew what this meant. If Belle and the Hestia team suffered a loss, Belle would be taken in by the Apollo Familia. With everything now set, there were only 5 days until the war games would take place. Both sides would have to prepare, but there was still much that needed to be done in the Hestia camp. For one, Lily needed to be rescued from the Soma Familia, and Welf and the others were going to take care of that. However, for Belle knew that he needed to train. He needed to get stronger. While he had briefly been asleep and unconscious, he felt something compelling him, something urging him to go to the mountains in the outskirts of town. When he awoken, he would tell this to Hestia and the others. Of course, they didn't feel fully comfortable with the idea of Belle just wandering off to the mountain, especially when they had to prepare with only 5 days' time. However, Belle felt this was what he needed to do. He needed to go to the mountain alone. Hestia wouldn't hesitate to support him. She would wish him luck and kiss him on the forehead. With that, Belle would leave. He made his way to the gates and to the outskirts. He went up to the mountains, climbing high until eventually he came to a bit of a clearing. Far off, he could see the city and the tower that led to the dungeon. However, he continued his trek, making his way forward. As he continued, though, the sky got darker and darker. He could hear the thunderclouds rolling around him. He wasn't sure of what to expect once he got there, but he knew that this was where he needed to be. He carried Mjolnir by his side as he made his way to the top. Upon doing so, he saw a wide open space. He wasn't sure of what to do next, but he stood in the center, and he closed his eyes. Holding Mjolnir to the sky above, he would say a small prayer. God of thunder, hear me. I beseech upon you answers and guidance. I don't know what I am supposed to do, but I know that this is where I belong. So please, please make it known to me. Show me the way. An instant strike of lightning would come down upon Belle, and he would find himself taken somewhere else. A hall, if you will. There were thrones to his left and thrones to his right. Sitting upon them were various Thors. Thors throughout history. There was classic Marvel Thor, MCU Thor, Ultimate Thor. There was the Thor of Norse mythology. Thors of different sizes and shapes. Thors of all different iterations, all throughout history. All versions of Thor, from his left to his right. Each one a different reincarnate of the god. As he made his way, there would be a throne in the center, but there was already someone sitting upon it. Someone that Bell did not recognize. He was a young man. He seemed to be of modest background. He had dark-tinted glasses, and he carried with him a cane. As he stood up, he walked to Bell. Upon meeting him, he would introduce himself. He was one of the previous wielders of the power of Thor. His name was Donald Blake. Bell was in shock to think that there was another member, someone else that he could converse with. The one known as Donald Blake would reveal to Bell that the reason why he had been brought here today was so that he could train, as it felt as though it was time for Mjolnir to evolve. Bell asked what he meant by this. How was Mjolnir supposed to evolve at all? Donald would explain that the Mjolnir that Bell carried now was not the original one that everyone thought it was. You see, in Thor's lifetime, he wielded many powerful weapons. There were 7 of them in particular. During the last great battle, Thor had a special Mjolnir made for him. It took a piece of each one of his weapons and forged it together, granting it a great ability. The Mjolnir that Bell carried now could transform into any one of the 7 weapons of Thor. He was only using Mjolnir in the Mjolnir form, but there were still 6 other transformations that it could undergo. Of course, this was something that came with time. This wasn't something that he could just unlock all at once. There were different progressions in power. As Bell looked closely at Mjolnir, Donald would tell him to focus. While using Mjolnir as a weapon was definitely an assist, Mjolnir's ability was that mainly of flight and swiftness. Bell taking this into note, as with Mjolnir he was able to fly pretty high into the air, almost times feeling as though the hammer itself was allowing him to. But Mjolnir wasn't what he needed for this battle. He needed something else. Something to move with speed that can match Hyacinthos. As he focused, he thought about the weapon he would need most in this battle. The only thing that came to mind was a sword. Donald would tell Bell to continue to focus. Focus on the weapon that he needed. Focus on the power. As he did so, Mjolnir would begin to morph, and it transformed into that of a sword. Donald congratulated him, telling him that that was the Odin's sword that he now had at his side. Bell could feel the power within it. It felt light, swift. There was no need to throw it. Now the training would begin. Bell would practice with the sword, learning in the ways. As he fought with it, he learned to move as fast as the lightning that he could conjure, to move with a swiftness and a speed, one that could not be matched by anyone. If the hammer represented the flight, the sword represented the pure speed of the gods. As he did so, Bell would practice, continuing on in his training of the sword, until the time had come. Of course, there was still something weighing on Bell's mind. He was grateful for the power, that much was certain. But there was still one thing that always bothered him. Donald would ask if it was about his worthiness, and Bell would explain that he sometimes wondered if this power was really his, if he was really worthy of such an honor. Surely there were others more qualified than him to be the next wielder of the power of Thor. This came from Bel's genuine humility. Unlike many in the world today, Bel had great respect for all of the gods that had come, even for the god Thor, who had been lost to time. He didn't want to besmirch his name. He didn't want to feel as though he were getting a handout. That's when Donald would tell him that Bel was not the only one who had suffered from this feeling. Even Thor himself had his worthiness questioned. There was a time when he was even banished to Earth because of it. But still, within time, each member, all who carried the power of Thor, had come to learn that it was not just the power, but what it represented. For Bel to have the power of Thor, it meant he represented more than just its pure power, but there were intangibles, morals, principles, all of which Bel encompassed in great value. If someone like Bel could not be worthy, then who else on earth could be? Hearing this gave Bel the confidence that he needed. He thanked them as he made his way from the mountaintop. Almost all of the 5 days had passed, and now it was time to return to the others. Meanwhile, back in the city, Lily would have been rescued from the Soma Familia. Being granted her freedom, she had now joined with the Hestia Familia. They were still putting together a team for the war game, and thankfully there were others that had come to help them. The god Micah of the Takamichi Zuchi Familia would offer allowing Mikoto and another to assist them. There were also members of the Loki Familia who were helping out in their own way. And then there was Miss Ryu from the Hostess of Fertility Tavern. Of course, she didn't want her identity revealed, and she wore a disguise, but she too would be competing in the war game also. And then there was Welf, who had finally decided it was time to join the familia that was best for him. And as such, he would ask to leave the Hephaestus Familia in order to join with the Hestia Familia. Knowing his intentions, his wish would be granted, and from there, the Familia would now be ready. The day of the war game would finally come. Outside of the base of the Apollo Familia, they were preparing for the attack. In the beginning, everything seemed fine. It seemed as though there was nothing to worry about. From what they had heard, Bel was seemingly missing and hadn't returned. They thought that he had gotten scared and run off, giving them even more confidence that they could win. When Hyacinthos heard this news, he too was pleased. He felt as though he knew everything, and it seemed as though now, the weight and the expectations of what was to come was starting to become too much for the Hestia Familia to deal with. As they were preparing to close the gate at the last moment, one of their members would come running in, thankfully before it would close upon him. This young member would tell them of news that had come straight from Apollo, and of course they had no reason not to believe him. Although unknown to them all, this was not the member that they had known. This was not really Luin of the Apollo Familia, but it was actually Lily who had disguised herself, giving them false information, thus creating an opening. When the siege began, the Hestia Familia would go in for the attack. Miss Ryu, being amplified with the power she had been given by Welf, who had created for her a few magic swords, that she could use for the attack. They would begin moving in. Miss Mikoto, with her skills with the sword, was able to block away all of the arrows that were shot upon her. They were seemingly able to move in with ease, despite with the numbers advantage. The Hestia Familia was able to deal with them a damaging blow. Hyacinthos would become aghast at what was going on. And if all of this was taking place, then it meant that that wielder of the hammer, Bell, couldn't be far behind. Inside, Cassandra would begin to feel a bit nervous. As a member of the Apollo Familia, she had her own special ability. When she had dreams, they were oftentimes premonitions of things that came true. And she had a dream of a white-haired rabbit that got into the garden and ended up destroying all of the vegetation. She had reason to believe that this was Bell, and that this was going to be their fate if they didn't take it seriously. But of course, because they thought that she was just an airhead, no one ever listened to her. This only made matters worse, when a cloaked figure moved quickly through the halls. No one knew who it was. They thought it wasn't Bell because he wasn't using Mjolnir. He was using a sword. It was a sword of decent size, but still. Loki, though, she recognized that sword. The sword of Odin's son. And she knew instantly who it was. Once she told this to Hestia, Hestia would have a smile on her face. Within the throne room, the cloaked figure had made his way, having gotten through many of the guards. Hyacinthos asked who it was, as the hooded figure removed his shielding to reveal himself. The crowds who were watching the war games, using a special sort of magic peering that allowed them to see things from no matter where they were. The people of the city watching on in absolute amazement as the hooded figure was none other than Bell Cranel, Gale Thunder himself. Hyacinthos couldn't believe what he was seeing. How had Bell been able to improve so much? You see, Bell gained more, and it wasn't only because of his training, but it was because of his skill, the skill of the hero. He was empowered by that of the Argonaut. The roof of the throne room would be destroyed, as Bell would go on the offensive against Hyacinthos, their swords clashing with one another. Hyacinthos couldn't believe what was happening. Just a few weeks ago, Bell couldn't possibly have matched him in speed, and yet now they were almost dead even. And where was Mjolnir? He couldn't find it. He couldn't tell where it was. Did Bell not bring the hammer? Did he think that he couldn't win with it? Or was he that arrogant to believe that he could win without using the power of Thor? He couldn't take this. He couldn't stand this. Hyacinthos, he hated everything about Bell. The young boy who was seemingly handed everything. The boy who was the attention of all the gods. His god especially. What made him so special? What made him think that he was the best, or that he deserved any of the attention that he got? Hyacinthos was angered, and he was going to take it out upon him. He attacked Bell continuously, Bell using his long sword and his short sword, both in tandem. As he fought against Hyacinthos, Hyacinthos became more and more desperate, using every tactic, everything he had in his arsenal to attempt to take Bell down. Bell would drop his long sword, dropping it in a particular area. Hyacinthos believed that this was his chance, and he believed that he saw an opening. He would jump at the opportunity to grab the sword and attack Bell when he thought that his guard was down. Hyacinthos ran to where the blade had been dropped, and he grabbed at the hilt as he yelled that Bel was going to be brought to an end. He didn't care about what Apollo wanted anymore. He just wanted to see the little rookie dead. He grabbed the hilt, and he prepared to strike Bel down. But there was a problem. He couldn't pick up the sword. No matter how hard he tried, he felt as though he were trying to pull at the trunk of a tree whose roots were burrowed down to the core of the earth. He couldn't pull it no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried. And then he realized his mistake as he looked up and saw Bel with his short sword. He jumped high above him as he summoned Lightning Bolt, the discharge of lightning surrounding the blade as he brought it down. Hyacinthos, his pride and his arrogance was his downfall. And in one fell swoop, Bel had now created the opening he needed to strike him down. With him being defeated, Bel would go and grab the flag, and as such, the Hestia Familia would be the victors of the war game. Many of the gods applauded Bel for his fighting prowess, and also for the smart strategies of the Hestia Familia. However, Hestia was now going to have some fun herself. Per the rules of their stipulation, she would make her demands known. That being that for Apollo, his Familia was officially going to be disbanded. His mansion would be confiscated, and he would be banished from the city of Orario forever. Everyone celebrated in their victory. Everyone was proud of Bel for what he had been able to achieve. And for Bel, he was proud of himself. He felt himself growing more and more day by day. But he knew that he wasn't doing it on his own. Unlike many who used their friends, who used their allies to only strengthen themselves and gain power, Bel knew he had the support of his Familia, of his goddess. He knew that one day he would master this power, and he had said it within himself. He would become the strongest Thor of them all. With the battle now won, the Hestia Familia would go to their new home. The mansion of the Apollo Familia was now in their possession. As they prepared to settle in, Hestia made one final change. Removing the Apollo Familia, their logo, she was going to add their own, one that she had made especially for them. It was the symbol of a bell and a hammer, and in between the two was a lightning bolt to pay homage to the god of thunder, Thor himself. Everyone looked on and approved of the logo. In honor of Bel, in honor of their Familia, and in honor of Thor, as the Hestia Familia now settled in to their new home. This concludes What If Bel Cranel Was Thor? Danmachi, The Last King, Season 2, Part 1. As always, if you're a fan of today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcasting that has to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we continue What If Naruto Was Trained by Dr. Strange? Naruto Mystic Adventures Shippuden, Part 6. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.